family, and colleagues. This is Richard Sullivan speaking, and this is our 18th episode of our video uh, series entitled Enhancing Human Relationships Through the Fourth R, the Relationship Skills. And today we're going to be going over the 7 ego states of transactional analysis. But why are we sharing information about transactional analysis and the 7 ego states? The parent, critical parent, nurturing parent, the adult ego state, and the child ego state, looking at the natural child, rebellious child, little professor, and the adapted or compliant child. So why are we doing this? We are sharing information about transactional analysis because I believe it will be a helpful way for you to be able to understand yourself and your interactions with others better. Now, transactional analysis itself was developed in the 1950s, 60s, and 70s by a fellow named Eric Berne. He wrote a book called The Basic Handbook of Transactional Analysis and the Games People Play. There's also Thomas Harris. You may have heard of his book, I'm Okay and You're Okay. And there are other TA, transactional analysis scholars, or writers like Claude Stein. So, as we say, we're sharing information about TA because it can help you better understand yourself and others. So let's begin our exploration of this psychosocial construct, okay? By sharing the 2-page handout which you see before you. Now let's start off with the ego state, okay? Now these 7 different states all belong to you. Please don't confuse about being an adult person, about being a parent, or being a child. All of these ego states are within your personality. So right now I'm in an ego state where I am simply giving you information. Okay, if I'm going to ask questions, I'm also in the adult ego state. Thus the ego state of a person is the state in which he or she gives information or asks questions. So if I were to say, what are the ego states, or the 7 ego states, and pose that question, and if I answer the 7 ego states are different ways of expressing our values, our thoughts, our feelings, and our behaviors, I am operating within the adult ego state that's within my personality. Now, examples of people who primarily talk or behave within the adult ego state would be people that you know, like Mike Wallace, who used to be one of the reporters on 60 Minutes. Today we have his son. Chris Wallace, who's on CNN and has a program called Who's Talking to Chris Wallace? He basically asks questions and gives information. And another example of someone who acts primarily in the adult ego state would be Bill Nye, the science guy. All right, so the adult ego state is the ego state that simply asks questions and gives answers. Okay, teachers, by the way, love to behave or act in the adult ego state. Now, within you, you also have a parent ego state. That's the ego state within you that is nurturing when you say, well, that's okay with me, you can do that, that's fine. Or when you say to others or yourself, and you're critical, that's not right, I'm not going to do that, it's wrong to do that. In other words, the parent ego state gives values, and the adult ego state gives information, asks questions, and the child ego state, which again exists within us, expresses our feelings and our behaviors. Now, examples of the critical parent ego state, I don't know if you remember, but Archie Bunker in All in the Family often came from the critical parent. And Red Foreman in the '70s show, and Ed Rooney as the dean of students in Ferris Bueller's Day Off, they primarily came from the critical parent, okay? Saying things are not good, this is not the way you should behave, etc. Now, examples of the nurturing parent in the ego state, remember we said there are two parts to the parent ego state, the critical parent and the nurturing parent. All right? So the nurturing parent examples would be Raymond's mother in Everyone Loves Raymond. Her name was Mary Barone in that particular series. And Edith Bunker in All of the Family often came from the nurturing parent ego state. The part of the ego state, the part of you that gives yourself and others permission to do whatever you want or whatever they want. So let's review very carefully. The critical parent basically over here criticizes and indicates what's not right or what is wrong, shares their values. Nurturing parent indicates that certain behaviors are okay. And when you're in the adult ego state, you give questions and give information. And in the last ego state would be the child ego state, again, that exists within you. And let's take a look at the various parts of the child ego state. Okay, it's when you act naturally like a child, you do whatever you want to do. You say to yourself, I can do whatever I want because I'm free. Just playing and acting naturally and feeling good and doing what you want to do. You're acting in your own child natural ego state. But you could also be rebellious. That's a child in you who feels like he or she wants to do things or do whatever I want, even at the expense of others. Okay, so this is the rebellious child in the child ego state. Now, you can be an adapted or compliant child in the child ego state. That's where you can do what you are supposed to be doing. And you say to yourself, I do what I'm supposed to do because I am the good one. And finally, you can be the little professor in the child ego state. It's a very creative part of your personality. And as the little professor, you might say something like, just like John Calvin, I believe in free will and I can do whatever I choose to do, period. Now, we have examples of the different ego states. In the natural child ego state, do you remember the cartoon or the television program called Dennis the Menace? Dennis the Menace acted naturally. Michael Meathead Stivic in All in the Family would be an example of the natural child. And J.J. Walker in Good Times would be another example. And Beethoven, the dog in the Beethoven, the movie, would be an example of someone acting in the natural child. So, about the adaptive child or the compliant child, it's when you act like, or examples of that would be like Little Red Riding Hood, Cinderella, Pinocchio, Robert Barone, who was Raymond's brother, and Everyone Loves Raymond. These are the periods or times when you act the way you're supposed to act, okay? And of course, the rebellious child. Good example would be Ferris Bueller in Ferris Bueller's Day Off. And the little professor, good example would be young Sheldon. Ever watch that show in the show called Young Sheldon, or Steve Urkel in Family Matters would all be examples of people acting from the little professor. So in review, when you give information and you ask questions, you're an adult. When you talk about values and you're critical about yourself and others, you're either the critical parent or you are giving permission to do certain things which may not be in your interest, but if you think it's okay with you to do that, then you're in the nurturing parent stage. And the child ego state is the most complex and most interesting. You could be a natural child and do whatever you want. Rebellious child, you can do whatever you want, but at the expense of others. When you're the adapted child or the compliant child, you are basically doing what you're supposed to be doing. You think you're the good one. And if you're the little professor, you're creative. And you try to basically show how smart you are. So those are the 7 different ego states. And you can get this graphic handout by going to my email page at rdsolomonphd@gmail.com, or you can go to my Facebook page and do a screenshot, take a screenshot of this diagram and also this diagram. Now, I invite you to share this 2-page handout with your family and friends and colleagues. And of course, you can find this this video series, not only on Facebook, but on Twitter and YouTube. And on next episode, we will explore how TA, or transactional analysis, can help you better understand your reactions with yourself and others. We'll explore that more deeply. But first, you have to understand the 7 different ego states. We want to thank you for being such an important part of this video series, and we'll see you next time. Please make sure you know the various 7 ego states. Thank you so much. See you soon. Bye.